July 1, 1916. Along a winding, muddy front in northern France, a strange silence falls after a week of thunderous noise. Thousands of British soldiers, laden with gear, check their watches. They wait for the whistle. For them, this is supposed to be the big push, the decisive blow that will shatter the German lines and end the Great War. What unfolds next is not victory, but one of the darkest, most brutal chapters in military history, the Battle of the Somme. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're journeying back to a conflict that fundamentally reshaped our understanding of war. The Somme wasn't just a battle. It was an industrial-scale catastrophe that has echoed through the generations. So, how did it all begin? By 1916, the Western Front was a stalemate. Millions were entrenched in a hellscape of barbed wire, mud, and machine guns. The Allied commanders, British General Douglas Haig and French General Joseph Joffre, planned a massive joint offensive along the River Somme. The idea was simple, if brutal: relieve the immense pressure on the French, who were bleeding to death at the Battle of Verdun, and achieve a breakthrough. The British plan hinged on one critical element: a colossal, week-long artillery bombardment. Nearly 1.5 million shells were fired at the German positions. The theory was that this unprecedented barrage would obliterate everything: the German trenches, the machine gun nests, and most importantly, the endless tangles of barbed wire. The infantry, it was believed, could then simply walk across no man's land and occupy the shattered defenses. But the theory was fatally flawed. Many of the shells were duds, and those that did explode often weren't powerful enough to destroy the deep, well-constructed German dugouts. Even worse, much of the barbed wire remained intact, creating deadly funnels for the advancing troops. The Germans, hunkered down deep underground, largely survived the storm of steel. When the bombardment lifted at 7:30 a.m. on that fateful July morning, they emerged, set up their machine guns, and waited. Across no man's land, the whistles blew. Officers led their men over the top. Burdened with up to 60 pounds of equipment, the British soldiers advanced at a walking pace, as they'd been ordered, expecting little resistance. They were met with a storm of machine gun fire that scythed them down in waves. Entire battalions were wiped out in minutes. The optimistic walkover had turned into a slaughter. By the end of that first day, the British Army had suffered nearly 60,000 casualties, including almost 20,000 killed. It remains the single bloodiest day in the history of the British military. For the soldiers who survived, the shock was profound. The neat, orderly plans of the generals had dissolved into chaos and death on an unimaginable scale. But the battle didn't end there. In fact, it had just begun. For the next 4.5 months, the Battle of the Somme raged on. It became a grueling war of attrition. Instead of grand breakthroughs, the fighting devolved into a nightmarish series of small-scale attacks on specific woods, farms, and trench systems. Names like Highwood, Delville Wood, and Pozieres Ridge became synonymous with relentless, close-quarters combat and horrific losses. The landscape itself was transformed into a lunar wasteland. The constant shelling churned the earth into a sea of mud and craters, swallowing men, animals, and equipment whole. Rain turned the battlefield into a quagmire, making every movement a struggle and rescue of the wounded nearly impossible. This was a new kind of warfare, impersonal and industrialized, where human life was just another resource to be expended. Amid this carnage, the nature of fighting evolved. The initial rigid tactics gave way to more flexible strategies. The British learned, at a terrible cost, the importance of creeping barrages, where artillery fire would move just ahead of the advancing infantry, providing a curtain of protection. Small unit tactics, using grenades, light machine guns, and specialized trench raiding parties, became the norm. And then, on September 15th, a new and terrifying shape lumbered onto the battlefield at Flers-Courcelette. It was the world's first ever operational tank, the British Mark I. These land ships, as they were called, were designed to cross trenches and crush barbed wire, impervious to machine gun fire. Their debut was mixed. Of the 49 tanks deployed, many broke down or got stuck in the mud. But those that did reach the German lines had a tremendous psychological impact. German soldiers, who had faced everything the Allies could throw at them, were terrified by these unstoppable metal beasts. Although not a war winner in 1916, the tank's appearance at the Somme marked a pivotal moment, heralding the future of armored warfare that would dominate the 20th century. As autumn turned to winter, the battle finally ground to a halt in mid-November. The relentless mud and exhaustion made further large-scale operations impossible. So, what was the result? The Allies had advanced a maximum of about 6 miles. The strategic breakthrough never happened. The cost was staggering. Total casualties for all sides, British, French, and German, are estimated to be over 1 million men, making it one of the deadliest battles in human history. For this seemingly tiny gain, a generation was traumatized. The initial optimism of 1914 was well and truly dead, replaced by a grim, hardened cynicism. The volunteer PALS battalions, where men from the same towns, factories, and offices enlisted together, were decimated, sending waves of grief through entire communities back home. The psychological toll on the survivors was immense. The term shell shock, what we would now recognize as PTSD, became widespread. Soldiers returned home bearing invisible wounds that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. For many, the world could never be the same after witnessing the industrial slaughter of the Somme. Looking back, the legacy of the Somme is complex. Militarily, it was a brutal learning curve. The lessons paid for in blood in 1916 would contribute to the Allied victories of 1918. It forced armies to innovate and adapt, accelerating the evolution of modern combined arms tactics. The introduction of the tank, the refinement of artillery, and the development of air power for reconnaissance and ground attack all had roots in this terrible battle. But its cultural impact is perhaps even greater. The Battle of the Somme has come to symbolize the futility and horror of the First World War. It inspired a generation of poets like Siegfried Sassoon and Wilfred Owen, whose raw, unflinching work stripped away any romantic notions of combat. It changed the relationship between the people and their leaders, fostering a deep-seated distrust of authority that lingered for decades. Today, the fields of the Somme are quiet. The landscape is dotted with beautifully maintained cemeteries and memorials, like the massive Thiepval Memorial to the Missing, which bears the names of over 72,000 British and South African soldiers who have no known grave. They stand as a silent, powerful testament to the scale of the loss. Visiting these sites is a deeply moving experience. You can walk through preserved trenches, see the craters still scarring the fields, and stand before row upon row of white headstones. It serves as a stark reminder of the human cost of war and the sacrifice of a generation caught in a global catastrophe. The Battle of the Somme is not just a chapter in a history book. It's a profound and painful lesson about the nature of conflict, a lesson that continues to resonate over a century later. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into the Battle of the Somme. If you found this video informative, please hit that like button and subscribe for more explorations of history's most pivotal moments. Let me know in the comments what other historical events you'd like to see covered. Until next time, take care.